You guys seem to really love Skylanders. So, by that logic, I decided to make another Skylanders video. This one is a very brief retrospective of the Skylanders franchise. Now, I'll just say one thing. This is only covering the six main games. So, none of the mobile titles, and none of, well, whatever the heck was released in between then. It's just Spyro's Adventure through Imaginators. So, how does the very first game in the entire series hold up? Considering that this game was released all the way back in 2011 when Toys to Life was still a brand new concept, Skylanders was really breaking new grounds. You see, there's been a lot of games in the past with Skylanders like mechanics, but never one that fully embraced it until this game. Spyro's Adventure does have one thing going against it, however, its name, Spyro's Adventure. Spyro doesn't really do anything in the plot, he's more of just a character you can play as. But if that's the biggest complaint you have, you know that you have a really good game. Spyro's Adventure is truly the most nostalgic of all the titles. This wasn't the game that I played first, but it's definitely got an air of nostalgia, reminding me of a simpler time when developers would put effort into games, even games like this. Now, as for the story of the game, it's really simple compared to most other games in the series. Basically, you have to restore the core of light and fight off chaos. Yeah, that's a very gross oversimplification, but that's the basic gist. What was really cool about this game was the fact that the toys that you bought in the store would actually become playable characters once you placed them on a portal. This was a very interesting concept, and to this day, I haven't seen anybody really try this. The only other game I can think of would probably be LEGO Dimensions and Disney Infinity. No, I don't count Amiibo as that's more of just side content. Now, what do I say about this game that hasn't already been said before? The graphics look surprisingly good for a 2011 game. Now, granted, they would look much better going onward from this game. But for a first game, not bad. It's honestly a really good art style. Now, as for levels and bosses, the level design is actually kind of interesting. You see, Skylanders is a bit of an RPG, but instead of being focused solely on combat, it actually focuses more on puzzles. The puzzles are not very difficult, but there are puzzles nonetheless, which I find to be quite interesting and something I never even noticed as a kid. That's not to say that combat doesn't exist, though. In fact, that's where the RPG element comes in. The Skylanders can be leveled up in game through an in game currency that you find literally everywhere by smashing everything. After you level them up, you can gain more money, more experience, and more moves. But here's the weirdest part of it all, there was no jump button. That's right. A children's platformer game in the early 2010s had no jump button. This was a point of contention even back then. Heck, it's still a point of contention to this day. That's not to say that people hate it. That's to say that it's a little confusion. The characters act pretty much the same as they always have. Spoiler alert, that doesn't really change. But What I will say is awesome about Skylanders Spyro's Adventure is the fact that its levels are the perfect length, but there is one problem with this game. The levels kind of repeat themselves constantly. It's a little confusing, but honestly, the first game works just fine without it. If you've played the game, you know what I mean. For example, the Cyclops level is very similar to the level right after it. I don't remember the names of all the levels, but I do remember that the levels tend to blend together. As for the roster, it was a great start. The only character I really didn't like was Prism Break. And to this day, that guy's my least favorite Skylander. But honestly, if that's the biggest problem I have, then you know you got a good foundation. The roster in Skylanders Spyro's Adventure was not the absolute best, but it wasn't anywhere close to the worst. It was a starting point, and well, they nailed it. There are some that are a little too powerful, like Camo and Trigger Happy. Skylanders Super. Ugh, I can't talk. Skylanders Spyro's Adventure is a game that I would rank a solid 6 out of 10. Yeah, it has a very high barrier for entry, requiring you to buy a lot of Skylanders. 8, actually, one for each element. It adds a difficulty selection, it has a brand new story, and the levels don't repeat themselves. But the other ones were balanced just fine, like Tornado. As for bosses, that's where the game really starts to show its age. The bosses are all fights against Chaos's minions. Heck, even the final boss is debatably a fight against Chaos and his minions. There are only two that aren't, but they're not very good. What? You thought I was gonna say more? There really isn't that much more. But once you do, it's pretty fun. This is a game for collectors, and I really do appreciate that. So, Spyro's Adventure gets a 6 out of 10. We all know what's next, but humor me for a second. Skylanders kind of didn't change that much between games. I guess if it ain't broke, don't fix it, but at the same time, there's kind of a thing as playing it too safe. Let me explain. First off, the game's art style, for first in the entire series, and the only time in the entire series, has not changed from the first game, which is not terrible, but it does feel a little funny how they have the exact same art style. Okay, one of them is good, the rock golem, but the other one, the tank, is so bad. I just don't like it. Next up is Skylanders Giants. So, what on earth does Giants improve from the first game? I mean, being such an important game from the 2010s, revolutionizing the idea of plastic being involved in video games. What does it change? But then again, that's fine. I like the first game's art style. I also love them focus on Chaos in this game, as Chaos is a really funny character. Go ahead, sue me. I like Chaos. But gameplay wise, nothing changed. Nothing. The only thing that's even slightly different would probably be the Giants. But the Giants don't really change much, other than the fact that you can stomp on Chompies and lift up heavy objects. That's kind of it. Also, the feats of strength, but they don't really do much. Also, you can skip certain puzzles. That's great, but the Giants just don't do much in their debut game. This is the only game where they really don't do much. The gimmick Skylanders don't really do much in this first gimmick Lander game. The bosses are a bit of an improvement, though. The first one being the Chompy Mage who came back, Drill X. Do I need to explain anymore? It's Drill X. And, well, Robo Chaos. Those are the only three bosses that I can recall that aren't arena bosses. But dang it, they're good bosses. Now onto the roster. I'm just gonna be blunt here. Giants has the absolute worst roster in the entire game. Not only does it have the least amount of new Skylanders, with half of its roster being just old Skylanders reposed. Yes, this was the first game to introduce reposes, and it wasn't even that interesting. But the other half weren't even that good to begin with. Like, the Giants are fine, with the only exception really being Eyebrow. Yes, I know that's a really hot take, but Eyebrow is not the greatest giant in the game. But other than that, there's not much there. Pop Fizz is amazing, but then you've got characters like Jedvac and Sprocket, and then you got characters who are terrible. Then you got characters like Shroom Boom and Pop Fizz who are actually decent. And then you got characters like Chill. Like, do you even remember Chill's existence? I'm pretty sure I had to remind you that Chill even existed. Skylanders Giants is one step forward and nothing else. That's not to say that Giants is a bad game. In fact, story wise, I think it's one of the best. It is a great game for the story alone. But honestly, I don't know how I feel about. Honestly, a game should not rely on story alone. So, Giants is probably going to be on the lower end of the scale, in my opinion, for the roster. But it still scores a 6 out of 10. Mainly because it's borrowing Spyro's Adventures foundation, but hey, at least it's a good foundation. And if you thought that was a controversial opinion, just wait till you hear what I have to say about Swap Force. That'll really ruffle some feathers. Next up on the docket is Swap Force. I can explain my opinion. This was the very first game to not be made by Toys for Bob, instead by a fledgling developer, Vicarious Visions, who previously worked on the handheld Crash games, including Crash Bandicoot for Game Boy Advanced, Crash Entranced, also for the Game Boy Advanced, and Crash Purple. I don't think you wanted to be reminded of that game. Okay, first things first, because we have a brand new team working on the game, we have a brand new art style. And I gotta say, Swap Force looks pretty good. I didn't bring it up in Trap Team, in Giants, mainly because the art style did not change in that game. But Swap Force, going for a more cartoony, cel shaded style, is pretty nice. As for the roster, it's also another slam dunk. The Swap Force Skylanders are probably the characters that play around with the whole being toys thing the most. And yeah, I'd say it's really good. Granted, I don't play around with that function much, but for those who do, they are able to make some really good combinations. Swap Wars is basically everyone's favorite game in the series. So where do I stand on this? I'm gonna level with you. It's my least favorite. That's not to say I don't like it. I do like the game. It's amazing. But it's my least favorite. For one simple reason: the levels. Now, the bosses are great, they are a huge step up. They have more of a focus this time around. The characters that get introduced are pretty cool. Tessa is just a very big fangirl, and Chaos is mom. Yeah, that's literally just her name. Cassandra was not even a name until this cartoon. But, well, Chaos is still great. Also, the fact that they had restraint on the supporting class of characters is really nice. But whenever I play through any of the games, this is the last game I want to come back to. Simple. The levels are just too long. The levels in later games are too short. The levels in this game are way too long. Like, way too long. There are only a few levels in the game, but they overstay their welcome. Why? I personally just don't like playing this game too much. This game is a slog to get through. Is it a terrible game? No, none of the Skylanders games are bad, but it is the most boring, in my opinion. There are a lot of stinkers. Now, personally, I love when a level design has a lot of great levels and it has a few bad ones to balance it out. But this one kind of outweighs the positive with the bad levels. For every jog, for every western level, you got a snow level. It's just not good. Not the best, in my opinion, but I do love the roster. This whole game, this was the very first game for Vicarious Visions, but spoiler alert, wasn't going to be the last. Now, me saying that Swap Force is probably the worst game in the main series, that's a hot take. And you can go ahead and tell me why Swap Force is better than any of the other games I like. But personally, from experience, I just find Swap Force to be boring. That's not to say it doesn't have good moments, but Swap Force just doesn't do it for me. I give it a 4 out of 10. For every great step it takes forward, it takes about 30 steps backwards. And yes, this does in fact mean that I actually like Imaginators more. Sue me. Actually, don't do that. I need my money for college. Is just Skylanders Trap Team. This one takes me back. Skylanders Trap Team was my very first Skylanders game. I remember back in 2014 when it was the hot new game, and Stampy was the one who was playing it, and I wanted more than anything to play this game. So naturally, I'm going to be a lot more biased towards this one. But even I can admit it has a lot of flaws. In fact, it probably has the most out of any game. First of all, we're back to Toys for Bob as a developer, so the art style has kind of changed back to that style. However, it's sort of a mix between the style of Vicaria's Vision and Toys for Bob, with cartoony proportions yet realistic environments. And I honestly love this take on Skylanders the best. It's realistic enough to feel lived in, but cartoony enough to feel fantasy like. I love it. The second thing we need to bring up is the roster, and as for the roster, well, this is probably the second best roster in the entire series. I don't know how they managed to get better than Swap Force, but Trap Team just nails it. I can't think of a single bad Skylander from this game. Every Skylander, from Blaster Mind to Snapshot to Wallop to Nightlight, all serve a purpose. It's all so good. Blastermind is probably the weak link in the chain, but even then, I don't mind. Blastermind was my very first Skylander, so I have a little bias. As for the gimmick, it's perfect. You get to trap and play as your villains. And because there's a huge focus on villains this time around, bosses are the best they have ever been. Every single boss fight in this game is amazing. The level design is also a huge step up from Swap Force. They basically have all of Swap Force's plus sides with none of the negatives. They do not overstay their welcome. They stay at just the right time. I also love the fact that they introduced two new elements, light and dark. But I don't like how they introduced them. You see, when this game was first released, it was a bit of a mess. Blastermind, who was the very first Magic Trap Master, wasn't even finished yet, and wasn't released until Wave 2, which is weird because the Magic Gates were unable to be opened without him. So this game was literally unable to be 100% and when it was very first released, which literally never happened before. Also, Light and Dark weren't even finished yet, so they had to be released as the unknown element. Yeah, remember that? This whole game's development history was a bit of a mess. In fact, I could probably make an entire video talking about Trap Team alone, and maybe I will someday. But until then, Trap Team, it gets an 8 out of 10. Yeah, it's super flawed, but I love it. That could just be childhood nostalgia talking. I mean, heck, I own the inferior version of the game, the Wii version. But I don't care. It's still my favorite. Trap Team just had the best gimmick of playing as a villain. Yeah, you had to buy more stuff than usual, and the light and dark stuff goes for way more than it should. But I love the game, regardless. Now, there is one problem, and that is you don't really have much of a reason to play as the villains. And what's sad is that there was a reason, because villains acted just like Skylanders in the previous versions of the game before it was released. But now they just act on a timer. And Chaos is literally the only character you need to get anyway. Once you have Chaos, you're good. Skylanders Trap Team is still a game I would wholeheartedly recommend 100% of the time. Even if it's just to play once and then never think about it again. If you're going to pick up Skylanders at all, make it this one. Because Trap Team had so much passion put behind it. and lots of people consider it the last good Skylanders game. And I can see where they're coming from. This was one of the last games to use the Toys for Bob engine. This was one of the last games to feature small details. This was one of the last games to use Elemental Gate. And this was the last game to use cores, which were completely useless at this point. But yeah, Trap Team had the best gimmick and some of the best level design, as well as the best bosses. So you better believe your scaly backsides. That sounds so wrong. That I love this game, in spite of all of its flaws. And a part of me wonders, what would this game look like if it had all the time in the oven it needed? Because it's already in a perfect spot. But would I be saying that if Toys for Bob had more time to cook? That's a very interesting question. Maybe this game would be even better, or maybe it would be worse. But who knows? Who knows? It wasn't the final one to use the engine, though. There was another one. But Skylanders Superchargers was by far, in a way, a game of laughs. It had a very interesting gimmick. Skylanders Superchargers. This game was the final game to be made by Vicarious Visions of Cars. The story was actually taken seriously for the first time in Skylanders history. For the first time ever, Chaos won. Yeah, Chaos wins. This was doing the bad guy wins 2 years before Sonic Forces did it. And I'd argue it did it better. Then again, it's not really hard to do it better than Skylanders. Then again, it's not really hard to do it better than Sonic Forces. That's a low bar. But Skylanders Swap Force had the problem of being too long. Skylanders Trap Team had the problem of being too buggy. But this game, it doesn't have any of those problems. Superchargers has one of the best stories in Skylanders history. I love it. Everything has gone wrong, and you're the only one who can fix it. The figures look amazing. Chaos, the new art style, looks so cool. Taking everything I loved about Trap Team's art style and dialing it up to 11. It is the best. So why is it not my favorite? The cars. They're used a little too much. But then again, everybody says that. But I kind of have to echo what they say because it's true. They're used a little too much. Also, this is the only mainline Skylanders game I haven't really played that much. But I'll tell you one thing, this game is pretty fun. From what I've seen, you can really tell that they tried something different here. But yeah, Skylanders Superchargers is a very mixed opinion title. The level design is great, the bosses are great, but the cars weigh it down. The only thing I don't like is the fact that the final boss is fought in the car. But that's about it. I otherwise really like this game. However, because I haven't played it much, I can't say it's my favorite. It has the best art style though, and the best story. Hands down, no questions asked. I don't have a lot to say on Superchargers that hasn't already been said, but the final game in the series is a game that is so hated that I bet you want to know what my opinion is on it. And that game is none other than Skylanders Imaginators. Here we go. This is probably the most hated Skylanders game of all time. I read through my comments section on my last video, and the common consensus was clear. Everybody loved every game in the series except for this one. Now, why is that exactly? Well, first of all, it deviates from the status quo quite a bit. First off, main support characters are not the supporting characters anymore. Now the Skylanders are. This was supposed to be a lead into the Netflix show, so obviously a little bit of tie-in was needed. But there was another thing about this. First off, this is the most expensive Skylanders game. The senseis go for an outrageous amount of money. Sure, they're the best lineup in the entire series with not a single bad sensei, but come on, they cost way too much. Like, seriously, Robo was the last original Skylander to ever be released, and he goes for about $600 at the cheapest. To the point where I say use NFC cards. Yeah, that's right. I'm gonna say cheat this one if you're gonna play it. It's a great game, but if you're gonna play it, cheat it a little bit. What? Activision's already cheating all of us. You really think that I'm gonna care if we cheat it back? Besides, they don't really care about Skylanders anymore and don't actively profit off of it, so yeah. Also, another thing, we went from the hyper serious story of Skylanders Superchargers to the lighthearted tones of Swap Force. That's a bit of a drastic shift. Also, the art style looks a little bit worse, but I can't quite put my finger on why. Probably because it's less detailed than Superchargers, but eh. This was the last game made by Toys for Bob, by the way, and it kind of shows. It kind of shows that they were kind of running out of passion. The final gimmick was the fact that you can make your own Skylanders. This is probably the best executed it could have been because in the game you can earn like a million collectibles. Yes, just like Sonic Forces, but this game does it better because some of your gear will actually change your Skylander. Eat it, Sonic. I'm just kidding. I love Sonic. That could be another video. But the point I'm trying to make here is that Skylanders Imaginators, I can totally see why it's everybody's least favorite game in the series. But I like it. Yeah, I like it. It's a good game. If you remove its weird aspects and its bad bosses, there's a good game in there. Admittedly, the good part comes from you just tearing through everything with the new sensei, plus the new Sky Chi, which I really find to be hilarious. This game is just so satisfying and is definitely a kind of turn off your brain and just enjoy its game. Nothing overstays its welcome. In fact, everything kind of understays its welcome. The Crash Bandicoot level is fun and interesting. Lost Imaginite Mines is amazing if it wasn't $1 million. And yeah, I also love the idea that the Skylanders are now taking front and center stage. I just wish they were balanced a little better with the other NPCs. I just wish that was the case. But no. I can definitely see why everybody says this is their least favorite. But I personally can't hate it. It's just too much fun. And at the end of the day, that's what a game is all about. Yes, on an objective level, this is the worst game in the entire franchise. But on a subjective level, I don't care. I love this game. So, yeah, that was my very brief retrospective on the entire Skylanders franchise. It may have only been 6 games, but these 6 games were great and defined so many people's childhoods, mine included. So, what's your favorite Skylanders game? And why is it Swap Force? Please let me know in the comments below. I can't guarantee that my next video will be on Skylanders. It's probably going to be another Dead by Daylight video. But I want to hear your thoughts about Skylanders in the comments below. Skylanders was a topic I have wanted to talk about for a long time, and now that I see there's a genuine interest in it, I definitely will talk about it again. Maybe as a bonus video, I might talk about some of the scrapped content, but who knows? I'm gonna have to do some research on that. Either way, I've been the Gamer Nerd, and always remember, stay frosty.